Da var vi tilbake med det tredje møtet til Eike denne ettermiddagen. For de av dere som ønsker oversettelse til norsk, så kommer jeg til å sitte i det hjørnet der borte og oversette fra engelsk til norsk. Og dere andre får gjerne lov til å komme og sette dere litt lenger frem. Nå. Nå er det en god tid å gjøre det. Så hvis alle rykker kanskje 1 rad frem, minst, så er det flott. På den. Veldig bra. Takk skal dere ha. Da la oss holde en bønn, og så gir vi ordet til Eike etterpå. Kjære Gud, vi takker deg for det du har lært oss frem til nå. Takk for de perspektivene som vi har fått i løpet av dagen, for det fellesskapet vi har opplevd. Og jeg ber om at du må fortsette å være med Eike i det han skal ha den siste presentasjonen. I Jesu navn, amen. Da gir vi tiden til Eike.
So we have come. We have done the first of the todays. We've done the second of the todays. And we're coming to the third of the todays. You remember the first of the todays was Jesus speaking about his ministry. And his ministry is Jubilee. I am here, freedom from captivity, eyesight to the blind. And so Jesus' ministry is about bringing heaven to earth and letting people experience that. And in many ways, it's very physical and very immediate. And then the second part is addressing people and the prejudices that we have, and the misconceptions, and that actually those that are faithful, those that are members of God's community, are the ones that we have generally not seen to be the members of the community. And the third one is what we're going to look at now. It might be the most difficult of the today passages, because we have maybe misunderstood what it's about. So I invite you to join me about the last of the today passages. The first one began Jesus' ministry. That's the first words Jesus speaks himself about his ministry. The second one concludes his ministry. And this one now concludes his life. Today is the last of those three. I invite you to go with me to Jesus hanging at the cross, where we find the last of the todays. These todays are unique to Luke. Nobody else has these today passages. So I invite you to go with me to chapter 23, to the death of Jesus, beginning in verse 44. We'll take a little bit of the context into it. Let me point you to the today passage at the beginning so you know that where we're heading. In verse 33, Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." That is the last of the today passages, and that's the one that we're heading to. What is the setting? Well, the setting has been Jesus has been convicted by a court amongst the Jews. He's been brought to Pilate. Pilate has had this difficult decision: do I save my job or myself, or do I save this man? As a background, Pilate has had several encounters with the Jews. The Jews have not accepted him kindly, and he has tried to show strength. He's done the Roman thing over and over again, which is to show power and strength. And the Jews have resisted that quite effectively. One of the most famous encounters is when the Jews are complaining to Pilate that he is bringing into the city of Jerusalem shields that have the emblem of Rome on them. And that is a pagan symbol to them and honors the gods, and they don't want this to defile the city of Jerusalem. And to Pilate, that is, we're the occupying power. We come in with whatever shields and whatever emblems we have. You accept the power of Rome. That is Pilate's position. The Jews are, we don't want this idolatrous stuff in our midst. And he calls the Jewish leaders out to Caesarea, surrounds them with an army that bears the emblems of these shields, and says, if you want to die now, I will slaughter you all. And the Jews call his bluff and say, kill us all. And this comes back to Rome. The emperor is very pragmatic, and he's like, I don't want a revolt there. Pilate, cut it out. If you must take the emblems off the shields, take the emblems off the shields. I don't care about the emblems, I care about peace. Because peace means money. Peace means I don't have to fight another war. Pilate gets rebuked. Keep the peace at all costs. Otherwise, you go to the lions. Pilate has a clear choice here. He's going to cause a riot if he lets Jesus free, and he will lose his head. Or he sacrifices Jesus and keeps his own head. That's where we are in the story. He's in the conflict between Caesar. The Jews have complained to the Caesar, and the Caesar has backed them, not the governor. You're in a volatile situation. That's Pilate's situation. That's where we're in. Now Jesus is at the cross, and the criminals are crucified next to him. You will see that in verse 32. 2 others who were criminals were led away to put to death with him. 2 others. Luke is more descriptive. He says they're criminals. In other accounts we have they were thieves. They were not thieves. You don't crucify somebody for stealing an apple from a marketplace. They were not thieves. They were rebels. They were followers of Barabbas, the one that got free, who was imprisoned already. The Romans didn't crucify for anything. They crucified for the highest crimes. This was the most heinous crime, death that they could impose. They're not just going to crucify you for thievery. The accusation that they would level would be thievery, yes, because if you were a rebel and you were hanged, you'd become a martyr and crucified. You'd become a martyr and people would celebrate you. He died for a just cause. He's one of us. But you could agree with Jews that had a high value of morality that thievery was not good. So the Romans were very pragmatic again. These were not thieves. These were the rebels. They might have been some of the forces that killed Roman soldiers in the alleyways. We don't know. But they were part of a rebellious uprising. Those were the people that were crucified. They had a very different view of life, which would seem to, what paradise was supposed to be. It was a life without the Romans. And they would fight to the death for that. In that sense, they parallel Jesus, because Jesus is also ready to die for a better world and for a just cause. Except that Jesus' view of what he's dying for is so different. Jesus dies for people, not against people. Jesus comes to save people, not to kill people. And that's the contrast to the rebels. So here are these 2 rebels that are led away to put to death with him, and they came to the place that is called the Skull, where they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And this is interesting to me, because who does Jesus say this to? Well, in some of the other Gospels, it's ambiguous, and it could be about the whole situation and all the mockery that's happening, but Luke seems to be a little more specific. The story here has been that developed is that it's the two others who were criminals and Jesus. That's the focus so far of the story. The Romans only come subsequent to this, the dividing of the garment and all of that. The focus right now of Luke is on Jesus and the two criminals next to him. And Jesus speaks. And Luke wants us to hear those words spoken to the two that are around Jesus. They don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. We can generalize and say Jesus would have said that in general to all, but Luke wants in this story for us to understand Jesus is particularly addressing them. And so, how do they respond to this invitation of forgiveness? Obviously, they've been caught. Obviously, they're sinners. And when we come back to the individual exchange that we have here between these, we hear a little more of their story in verse 39. One of the criminals who were hanged next to him saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence? We indeed justly, for we are receiving the due rewards of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." This guy is not one of us. This guy is not one of the rebel movement. He is the one that was supposed to bring peace. We killed Romans, and we are justly put to death for our actions. This is now the sinner. When we looked at Zacchaeus, this was the righteous man who was left out of the community. This is now the sinners who justly deserve their punishment. But the words of Jesus have changed him. The words of Jesus at the cross. And I believe the ones that Jesus has just spoken, "Father, forgive them," are the linchpin for this criminal to say, there's something different about this. I have been forgiven. I have been forgiven before I asked. I have been included before I realized I needed it. I thought I was part of a community of rebels, people that had a cause. But I've been given forgiveness before I knew I needed it. And here now he expresses what forgiveness means. I've been accepted even though I made mistakes. You have not, he's saying to the other, you have not even realized that. These words that Jesus spoke have not had an impact on you. And so then he turns to Jesus. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That is saying something. He's using the terminology of kingdom. Kingdom is not Luke's favorite terminology. Matthew is the one that talks a lot about the kingdom. So this phrasing it in kingdom language is quite unique. It's also unique at this point in time because they're all hanging there at the cross. At this point, he must be realizing something that the others have missed out on, that there's a journey beyond the cross that he sees. This is a little like Bartimaeus, who sees something in Jesus that the whole community misses. You remember Bartimaeus had said, "Son of David," while everybody had just seen Jesus, the man from Nazareth. Bartimaeus, blind as he physically was spiritually enlightened. And so here, this man responds with similar spiritual discernment, seeing something that isn't visible to anybody else's eyes. I see that there is a reality to come that I have not partaken, and that's because you're in communion with the Father. Father, forgive them. Because you can extend forgiveness, that's why there must be something beyond earth, beyond life now, beyond the cross. He's not questioning his immediate death, But he does recognize there's something beyond the grave that is more powerful than the cross itself, more powerful than the Romans. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. There's that realization Jesus will go there first. A realization that it is Jesus' kingdom, your kingdom, and that there's an implicit invitation with the forgiveness that he can be a part of that kingdom. And Jesus says to him, truly. This is very important. Truly is not said lightly by Jesus. It's used for very important sayings. I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Let me step away and just do a short little excursus. I'm sure you are aware that this is a very complicated passage. When we talk about, is there a soul that continues after life, or does our soul body as a unit sleep? There are different views among Christians of how to understand that. And this is often a passage that is reflected upon. One statement that has been often discussed is, well, here Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. So there must be an immediate afterlife, and they will both ascend into the heavens and be there immediately. That is one view, because it says today, within the end of the day, and Jesus is here on a Friday afternoon, shortly before sunset. In fact, they'll have to hurry up the process of dying because the sun is setting so soon. So, today, within a few hours, you will be with me in the heavenly kingdom. That is the interpretation of some, and that means there must be an immortal soul that continues. As Adventist community, we have generally said we don't see any evidence of that outside of this passage. This passage is difficult. Other passages talk about a soul sleep, and a future resurrection in which human beings will be raised from the dead and seem to not have participated in what's happening in Earth's history in that meantime. And we see that in some of the passages of Luke and of the Gospels in general, so Jesus' message, but also in the Old Testament. So what do we make of this passage? And one suggestion has been to move the comma here, because commas were not in the original manuscripts or language. In fact, not even spaces were part of the original language. Letters were just compressed as close as possible because you had to kill an animal to preserve writing. Pergament. So you're going to use every space available. No punctuation in the early manuscript. So could the comma be in a different place? Absolutely. It could be saying, I say to you today. There is a problem, though, that this would mean, well, it's kind of nonsensical. I'm saying to you right now that I'm saying to you right now that. So there's a bit of a redundancy on that. So maybe it's for emphatic purposes. I'm saying to you right now. But then again, Jesus doesn't have much time left in general. The only thing that Jesus will say after this is, Jesus, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, in verse 46. So why the emphatic part? I think both of these views make a fundamental misunderstanding that I think you by now have caught on. Today is not 24 hours for Luke. Today is the beginning of a new era. Today is something of a new hope. It is not 24 literal hours. It's not daylight hours. It's not right then and there. I say to you right now, or I say to you we'll be in heaven in a few hours or a few minutes. Both of them make the assumption that today is 24 hours. But that's not Luke's point at all, just like I set out at the beginning. Today we use computers, not not letters or typewriters. We use computers. Well, today is not 24 hours, or it's talking about a general era. And that's how Jesus has used that today so far. What would that mean? Well, what Jesus is actually saying here is, with my death, a whole new phase of our salvation is happening. He began with Isaiah 61, and in essence he's saying, I'm now looking to Isaiah 66. We have covered those 5 chapters. I have demonstrated and lived that out, and now we live in this hope of a future reality that will be altogether different. And because of that future, that paradise, I live my life differently today. That era has now begun. It might not be visible to you or me, but it is already a reality. Kingdom has now begun. In a few pages, because Acts continues the story of Luke, we have John in our Bibles in between, but Acts actually continues the story. In that, the story begins with the disciples asking this question, Jesus has been raised from the dead, are you now going to establish your kingdom? And they've made the same fundamental mistake, that they thought Jesus' kingdom was not there yet. It has been there all along, just not visible with our human eyes, visible with our spiritual eyes. Paradise has begun, but it is not complete yet. Jesus' presence has brought healing to people, but it is not complete. It has not reached everybody. It has not turned all the world upside down. There will be a time that we look forward to of a second coming, and that is still future. But we can live in that reality already now. And that is the peace that Jesus gives this man. In that sense, I don't care which way we move the comma. I think the point is that of an era, a new era of paradise. And that is the ultimate fulfillment of what Jesus' ministry was from the beginning. Isaiah 61 has now gone into 66, which is paradise is now here. The end of Isaiah finishes with this glorious scene of what heaven will look like. And with that, Jesus taps into it. This is what we can experience now, today. These are the 3 today passages. And in essence, he has moved from today is liberty for physical disabilities, for challenges that we face. It has moved from the poor and the disabled. They receive restoration. Then it has gone to the prejudice, those that are suffering from prejudice. They receive restoration. And now there are also those that are sinners that receive restoration, that have obviously made mistakes. They also receive restoration. That encompasses all of humanity, and somewhere in there we fit in, all of us. Maybe in more than one of those categories. When we talk about the life cycle, and we were just talking about it over lunch, at some point, almost all of us will be disabled people, bedbound, wheelchair-bound. My grandmother suffered from dementia. She did not know who I was. It produced some quite humorous moments, but also many more sad moments, especially for her. The moment when you can see that you're trying to break through a mental fog and connect to a person that is obviously visiting you, but you don't know who it is. In some way, we are all on that journey of disabled and poor. We're all on a journey that has included prejudice that we have received and given. And at least for me, I know that I'm a sinner. Maybe not one that has killed a Roman, because I haven't spent much time in Italy. But for Jesus, that's not the big issue. Those that recognize their sinful nature. So then how do we deal with one another? And how do we deal with the people that look so different? How do we deal with the people inside of our community and the ones outside? And I think this is where the challenge comes in. I think in some ways our society is very physical bound. We look to the outside very much. And that is the first reference point. We look to, is somebody fit? Is somebody attractive? Those are the 100 milliseconds that we do. We look to our own ability. Say, I can do this. I can manage this. I'm strong. I can. Or we say, look at all my wrinkles. Look at all my scars. I am old. We're very much bound into our physicalness because our primary sense is sight. So we're bound into that physicalness. We're bound to make those distinctions between you and I based on physical attributes. Fat, skinny, white, black, man, woman. We make all those distinctions based on what we see. So we live in a very physical world, and that produces those challenges. How do we range? How do we deal with the people that live in different aspects? Different stages of their life, different points in their life, different heritages, different abilities. Sometimes that range is wide. Disability begins with simple things like eyeglasses. I have prescription glasses, as some of you do. It's a wonderful thing to live in the modern era where we have not only made glasses a matter of utility. I can now see where I would be pretty blind without them, but we've also made it into a statement, a fashion piece, in some places even a jewelry item. We've made it an artistic piece. In fact, my children, when I don't wear my glasses and I put contacts in, they will say, "Oh, Daddy, let me get you your glasses. This is not you. You don't look like yourself." And I have confirmation, objective confirmation, that when I don't wear my glasses, my phone will not unlock. My face is not recognized without my glasses. I can wear different kinds of glasses, but apparently Siri thinks I need my glasses to be me. In that sense, 100, 200 years ago, what would I have done? My job as a lecturer, as somebody who reads books, who has to teach, who has to grade and mark, I would have been useless at my job without this simple device that is so innocuous in some ways, so popular, so beautiful even. The physical ranges from as simple as poor eyesight, I don't consider myself disabled per se, and yet without it I would be, all the way to bedriddenness or leprosy on the other extreme, where you are a threat to the community around you because of your physicalness. But it can also be mental. Disability can begin with something as simple as being discouraged or depressed. We recognize some of the other things like ADHD or autism. The Bible will talk about something called demon possession. And I believe that that term encompasses at different times real demon possession, and at other times describes things that we would today say are psychological misadjustments that we can today treat quite well with medication. It describes the whole spectrum. For them in the ancient world, all of those descriptions were demon possession. Today, some of them are treatable. It deals with the physical and with the mental. And in some ways, we're all on a journey to becoming more or less disabled as we age. So how do we deal with each other, and how do we deal with people on the outside? I think there's a couple of things that are not helpful at all as we deal with this idea of focusing so much on the able-bodied. And when we look at the others that aren't as able as I am, that are disabled in the physical, in the mental sphere, there are some things that aren't helpful. One of them is a set of assumptions. One set of assumptions that sounds very biblical is you're cursed by God. Indeed, the Bible does mention disabilities as a curse from God in the Pentateuch, in Deuteronomy, about the things that if you don't follow God's plan for your life and if you want to leave this covenant and you break it, these are some of the outcomes. But that connection of it being immediate and direct and applicable to you or that individual that we're opposed to, that is something that is not up to us to decide, because those curses are up to God to administer or not. We have the famous example where Jesus dispels this when he deals with the blind man, and his disciples come to him and say, "Who sinned? Who is under the curse of God? He or his parents?" And Jesus says, "No one. It's for the glory of God." Now that bears a whole other complexity in it. But Jesus is very clear, it is not up to us to decide whether somebody has the curse of God or not. So it is not helpful to assume that. It is not helpful to assume that more prayer will help individuals. Prayer is wonderful, and maybe they have and maybe they haven't. But maybe that's not for us to decide or help. Most likely, they have prayed till their hearts break. And if you want to know an example of Bible characters, you don't have to look very far. You can ponder about many characters in the Bible that have struggled with health issues or with physical issues that pray deeply. Maybe the one that expresses it most clearly is Paul. "I've prayed for this thorn in my flesh to be removed. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and God did not remove it from me." Scholars have struggled deeply about what this thorn in the flesh is, and I don't think it matters. But some of the suggestions have been poor eyesight, because he does describe his poor eyesight and the big letters that he needs to write because he can barely see. And most likely that would be a good reason why he uses scribes all the time. Is it his eyesight? Maybe. Maybe it's his depression, because the beginning of that letter in 2 Corinthians where he writes about this experience, he writes so profoundly about the deep depression that all he's yearning for is death, because he's so mentally distraught. If we think depression is only something for sick people, we have missed Paul and Elijah, heroes of the faith. Mental struggle. Is Paul's thorn in the flesh a mental thing? Is it a spiritual struggle? We don't know, but we do know God's answer, that is, "My grace is sufficient to you, because in your weakness, my power is great." And God's power. Physical weakness can be a sign of power of God. We only see the physical. You're not able-bodied. You're not the way we would like you to be. You're not hiking with us. You're wheelchair-bound. You're not crossing the street at any point in time because you're blind, so you're waiting for the audible signal at traffic lights. Why don't you just go? You're limited. We look at the outer limitations, but God, in Paul's case, doesn't look at the outer limitations, but the possibilities that are now able, because everybody recognizes you are weak, but God is powerful. It can be an incredibly powerful thing. So more prayer does not help. It didn't help Paul. It didn't help Job. It didn't help Elijah. Our suggestions for that are not helpful. Another thing that is not helpful is that I know best what somebody needs. We've already discussed that and highlighted that briefly. Jesus allows Bartimaeus to express, what is it that mercy is for you? And that can be different for different people. For example, I wonder, what is it going to be in heaven? Will I not be wearing glasses in heaven? Will my kids then not recognize me? I've come so used to wearing glasses, they're not a bother to me, they're a part of me. In fact, other people think they're so much a part of me that they wouldn't recognize me for who I am. The wrinkles that we have, are they the joys of many memories, or are they the pain of suffering? What is it about our physicalness? Is it possible that we carry some of that on? Would we be recognizable without it? We make assumptions about what we think other people should be and should be able of doing, and that's not helpful. So what is helpful? Maybe to simplify it, what is helpful is what Jesus is doing here. Giving hope, accepting, forgiving, extending an arm, engaging in a conversation, beginning something, even if there isn't something. I might summarize that as a high view of other people. Jesus approaches Zacchaeus with, here is somebody who's seeking me, not with, here's a thief and a robber. Here's somebody who's seeking me. Where are those people? Jesus approaches the men here at the cross, not with they're criminals and rebels, they deserve to be crucified. He approaches with them with not what I see on the outside, but a high view of them. If I give them forgiveness, they can be open and receptive to understanding the Father and seeing the Father, and so they do. So what is helpful? It is helpful to come with other people with the understanding that they know best, with an understanding that they might not want to be healed because it's become so part of their identity, just like my glasses, that they want to be accepted, heard, appreciated, that they don't want special treatment, they just want same treatment, same opportunity. And that's what I would summarize maybe as a high view of people with disabilities. They struggle as much as I, as much as we, with questions of identity, of meaning, of ill health, and all of that. They approach their disability with anger, with humor, with sadness, and we need to allow them to express that if they so wish to. But maybe we can adopt from Jesus and these 3 today messages that we can see beyond the physicalness, that it means restoration to a new community, and that the hope of a paradise in the future can already guide our lives today. And in essence, that's what kingdom is. If we have that view and perspective of where we long to be ourselves, we can share that hope, that vision, that appreciation, and make heaven come to earth, at least in the sphere that we're in. And then we have encapsulated the 3 today messages of Jesus' ministry. With that, I want to conclude, but give you some opportunity for questions and reflections, and maybe I can answer them or at least direct you to some answers or experiences. The 3 today messages of Jesus. How does it impact you? What questions do you have? Yeah.
In the morning session, you have talked about the first 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And you said there is a connection between Jesus saying, today this scripture has fulfilled, was quoting Isaiah 61.
Mhm.
So my question is like, when the verse continues in Isaiah, it talks about day of vengeance.
Mhm.
So does the Jubilee has something to do with day of vengeance? Does it have eschatological meaning?
Mhm.
That's my question.
The explicit connection to Jubilee is Jesus connecting to Isaiah 51. The Jubilee connection is even stronger in 58. Sorry, not 51, 58. What Jesus does in citing this passage, he takes part of Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2, but he drops the ending off of verse 2, and then instead adds a phrase from Isaiah 58. And with that, he duplicates the release. So the release appears twice, always at the end of a sentence, to give emphasis to it. So he does that amazing thing. The real Jubilee connection is in Isaiah 58. Nonetheless, why does Jesus leave off vengeance? And I think the answer is fairly simple. This is not the time for vengeance. Leave vengeance up to God. Yes, it's okay to recognize that God's wrath will be poured out. That's a message we find in Revelation as well. And that God will bring judgment upon people. There's an incredible message of fairness that we actually are attracted to. We want life to be fair for ourselves and actually for others as well. And we recognize when there isn't fairness. Habakkuk, the whole book of Habakkuk is about, God, this isn't fair. I see that things are happening to other people. That's not fair. Bring justice. So God bringing justice is a wonderful message. But Jesus doesn't consider it the message for his day. Now that's for a future time. The prophets often conflated what we today call first and second coming, because we're living in this in-between time. We can see there's a first part to it and there's a second part to it. Now let God worry about that part. Right now we're living in that time when we are to bring peace and restoration to all the people around us, particularly the people that are suffering, the poor and the disabled that we have here in this passage. It seems I've either put you all to sleep or I've answered all the questions ahead of time, and therefore... Yes.
So you were talking about ableism and disability and similar. Could you please help us define what ableism is? That's one thing. And second thing is, how is it new to the church and to Adventist church in particular, or Christianity in global? Is there something new now that is happening that we have discovered, or is this kind of an old message? So what is new in it?
Yes, in some ways it's a very old message because it's already in Scripture. So ableism is seeing the world through the eyes of abled people and not recognizing that there are people that are disabled. In fact, some would say we have at times created a society that has a prejudice towards able-bodied people. And that is, the majority of us live in that realm, so it's hard sometimes to understand people that live more on the edges. I think we're realizing that there's more nuance to that. In all of these aspects, I've highlighted the physical and the mental. An example of that is we recognize at airports and in other places that stairs are a wonderful thing for people that can have full mobility of their legs. But as soon as you have crutches or a wheelchair, stairs can be very disabling. You can't access a place anymore. And that's because of a decision to favor one mode of transportation over the other. Giving the opportunity, most likely everybody would actually be fine with a ramp. Stairs can be slippery if you have ice. So ramps, in essence, are a quite easy way to accommodate everybody, but at least a ramp and stairs would allow access to something for everyone. I think we're becoming a little more attuned to it, and that's a positive aspect to that. So you're asking the question, what is new? Ableism is seeing the world through the eyes of an able-bodied person and not giving opportunities to others that interact with the world differently. And that can be limiting to other people. Sometimes we call them disabled, and that term is sometimes the term, maybe a better term is other-abled, because not all disabilities necessarily mean that you can't participate in life, just that you're participating in life differently. An example of that would be hearing impaired or deaf people. They wouldn't say, we don't have a language. We just have a different language. We communicate differently. Much like whales communicate differently with each other than dogs do. Whales don't sniff each other's bottoms. Whales communicate through sounds. But dogs interact with smell. We interact with the world differently. And so we just have a different language. Some of these are impairing, and some of them are limiting, and some of them are actually quite easily adoptable. So that even the term disability has some limitations and needs to be understood in a more nuanced way. Is there something new to it? In some ways, no. In some ways, yes. So I've already alluded that even going back to the Egyptians and certainly to the period of the Bible, disability is something that is addressed and spoken about. And all kinds of things, skin diseases, that then leads later on to an understanding of leprosy, and all kinds of diseases are well known and attributed in Scripture. Some of them lifelong, some of them contagious, some of them not. And ancients dealt with it differently. Usually they did, I mentioned the example of exposing, you are not worthy of life. You're outside of the city walls, or even you're out in the desert. Take care of yourself. You're cursed from God. And so we want you far away from the community. In some ways, our modern world is actually picking up on this idea that we can be helpful to people. 200 years ago, we had the same range of ability and disability, if not more, because medical science wasn't quite as developed. If you had a Napoleonic war and you had a shot to the leg, what would happen to you? You'd die on the battlefield. Nobody picked you up. Nobody carried you home. It wasn't until Florence Nightingale that nurses become a way of, we can actually look after people. They aren't doomed to death just because somebody stepped on their toes. But maybe they can't get off the battlefield. So medical science has increased our awareness of some of these, even into the mental aspects where some things are actually quite treatable, but not everything. So in the past, we either let people die on the battlefield, or we locked them up into insane asylums or other places because people didn't know how to deal with these other abled people. And so we pushed people into the margins. And that's where you get the horrible stories that you then read of in Charles Dickens's David Copperfield, for example. Atrocious stories of kids and put together with seemingly autistic people and horrible situations. At some points, we thought electroshock could cure everything, and so we electrocuted people. Or if you were referencing the past of my country, you would give them to the gas chambers. They're a threat to society. They're a nuisance. They're draining our society. If you have that perspective, that's a low view of humans. Well then, ignore, lock away, or incinerate. But if, like Jesus, you have a high view of people, then you engage with them. One of the interesting things, after having lived in the Philippines for quite a while, we flew to see my parents who were living in America at the time. We hadn't left the airport for more than 15 minutes. And my wife said, I want to go back home. This is so sterile. We were driving along the highway with fences on each side, all beautifully segregated and separated from human life. And the rich had their beautiful houses in gated communities, protected by fences and by guards, so that nobody else could come in. A wonderful thing about the Philippines is that everybody lives together, the poor and the rich, the sick and the able-bodied. You see everybody. Everybody's out on the streets. And that's life. So in some ways, it's always been with us. I think we have today a certain sensitivity, which is actually a fascinating Christian sensitivity. A secular historian called Tom Holland has written several books and articles, especially about the Roman period. He's a historian, and he said the values of caring for the least of us and for the marginalized in society is a deeply Christian perspective, not a pagan perspective. That we care for other people is a demonstration that we've actually adopted Christian values, even as a society in general, even if we don't express them as such. And he doesn't claim to be a Christian at all, but he recognizes that these values, the Roman Empire is all about power and strength, but Christians say, no, the blind and the widows and the poor and the sinners at the cross, the criminals, all of them are part of God's kingdom. In fact, those might be the actual people that make up the kingdom of God. And so when Paul talks about defending his apostleship, he says, yes, I'm mentally disturbed, I'm physically beaten, I have a thorn in the flesh. Don't look to me if you're looking for strength. Look to me if you're looking for a disabled person through which God's glory shines. That's who you're looking at. Don't look to me for a great oratician. I'm not a good speaker. But look to me to see God's power, because I'm weak and God is strong. Not because I'm strong, but because God is strong in my weakness. So has anything changed? I think we live in an era where in general society we're more aware, and so we're seeing maybe more of it. We're experiencing, we have now children that we recognize with an autism spectrum, with ADHD, with physical. We're allowing more of that to enter the public sphere because we're not locking them away anymore, and that's a brilliance to it. But there's much that can be done. And I think especially with a message like Jesus has, to tap into that and extend that, because stigma is still real and we haven't finished the process. So to reach out is a wonderful opportunity. To reach out to people groups that are struggling is a wonderful opportunity. I already shared in the first hour that I grew up in a church that did ministry for the hearing impaired and the deaf. And I find that it is not just a wonderful way of connecting with people that in this case are other-abled, have this incredible insight into a different world than mine, have their own language and own expressions and own humor, so I get confronted with that other world. But also something happens if you engage with people and if you treat them like you want to be treated, as people that have the same desires and hopes and wishes for life, a high view of people. They will say, here's a place where I can feel at home, where I'm treated and respected for, people care for me. Let me get my friends. And those friendships are tight-knit because you're dealing with a specific, in this case, in our case, deaf, hearing-impaired society. They got their friends They moved. They picked up from all places in Germany and said, here's a church that we can participate in. Here's a place where we are heard. That's where we want to be. That's where we have community. Did that mean sacrifices of the church? Absolutely. It meant people had to learn a different language, and people had to sit there every Sabbath and translate back and forth. And the church did that. And the community grew. A wonderful opportunity to reach out. In a church that I pastored many years later, it was immigrant children. We identified that immigrant children were an issue. They didn't know what to do after school. The parents were at work, so they just roamed the streets. So my dear old saints, the ladies of the church, retired, not in the best of health, but in good enough health to bake cookies and to help with some maths homework. They got together and did after-school programs. And the mayor of the city came and said, can't you do more? Can't you do Pathfinders? We need more activities for kids. Identifying a community and sacrificially engaging means your church will grow because people know that you care about them. That's the ministry of Jesus. So have things changed? No and yes, in some ways. Long answer to a short question, but I think it was intentionally a long question. Camilla is asking the last question. No. Giving the sign that we are done with question taking. Final question. Going once, going twice, going. Yes, final question.
Thank you very much, Pastor. I was wondering about the story of Zacchaeus.
Yes, otherwise I'll repeat it. The Zacchaeus story, yes.
So, and it's very impressive with the story of how thinking of him not as a short person, but as a young person. And I was wondering, so if he had not climbed the tree, would Jesus have found him anyways? And as we as Christians, do we have to put in some effort to be seen by Jesus Christ?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a very humorous part of the story. I don't think that it matters per se whether he climbed a tree or didn't. It certainly shows the length to which he goes to seek Jesus. And again, reinforces the idea he is actually an innocent. He's actually a righteous person that is so in tune. It also makes us see the crowd as even more antagonistic, that they don't let him see it. And that's the interesting thing. The community around Jesus is the greatest prohibitor of people entering the community. They want to be there, but they don't want anybody else to be there. May we not be a crowd like the crowd Jesus had, is the implication, right? Does it matter? No, I don't think so. We have enough of stories of Jesus that he intentionally went to places because he knew. This is certainly an aspect that Luke wants us to understand, that Jesus has a much deeper understanding of the world than is accessible to us humans at times. But the apostolic, the church in the early stages in Acts, where we continue the story, does the same thing. Whether or not they can recognize here's somebody seeking God, they are attuned to assisting people. So when Paul goes from community to community, he finds those people that are yearning. He's intentionally looking for ways to engage with people. And I think Jesus demonstrates here that these people weren't looking for Jesus, the two criminals at the cross. They're not looking for him. They're not making any effort. They have been haphazardly placed there by the Romans to just be a trio now. There was no intention by any of them to be there with Jesus at the cross at that point in time. Jesus initiates and opens the door for them to engage. And in essence, the story begins even for Zacchaeus, and he arrived in Jericho. Right? Jesus arrives in Jericho. So now the story can develop because Jesus is there. Not because Zacchaeus is there, but because Jesus is there. That's why the story develops. So it really begins with God's action towards us, and that's an Old Testament story. God approaches Abraham, not Abraham, God. It's the story of all times. God engages Jacob and gives him the vision of the ladder and wrestles with him. It's not that he seeks out. So it's that reaching out, and that's then what the church is called to do in New Testament times, to be the extended arms of God to the people around us, whether they want it or not. It's not up to us to decide that. Are you seeking God or not? And my grandfather was a literature evangelist, and that was his ethos. I will knock on every door and see and engage. And sometimes I'm successful. Most of the time I'm not. That's okay. But I will go and see where can I find those people I'm going to engage. We sometimes as a church have this idea, well, come to us. We're welcoming. No. That's not Jesus' thing. I'm in Jerusalem, come out here. Or I'm in the desert, everybody come to me. No, Jesus' thing is, I come to you. I will come to your house. I will eat at your table. I will sit at your well and wait for you to come. And then let's talk about water and life that springs forevermore, and water so that you won't thirst. I will come to you. I will go to Samaria just to see you. That I think is what Jesus did and what we should do, with a couple of examples. Extended arms, being out there and extending that arm, and with that winsome attitude, once people can see our heart, a heart that is engaging and open and sacrificial, bringing peace and forgiveness and hope, well, people will enjoy that message. People are yearning for that message of Jesus. Let's have a word of prayer as we close. Thank you for that question. Dear Father in heaven, we've reflected on the message of Jesus, and we thank you for this message because we have been touched by that message ourselves. We wouldn't be here if that message hadn't already reached us. We wouldn't be sitting here committed to an afternoon if you hadn't touched us in a special way. And as we reflect on that experience, we recognize that it is the warmth of your forgiveness, the presence of you in our lives, the sitting around the virtual table, that conversation that we've had, that encouragement from the community. That's the reason why we're here. Help us to extend that to people that might have never experienced anything like that. Allow us to be those hands that extend from you and reach out into the places and neighborhoods and people that we are connected with, that we see, that we can engage with. I ask this in your name. Amen.